Hey religious researchers, Darren Slade here. As I'm sure you already know, global pandemics, diseases, and other pestilence rank among the deadliest kinds of incidents that routinely affect our planet and our species. And some infectious diseases like malaria go back tens of thousands of years. In fact, one of the oldest biblical traditions actually states that Yahweh afflicted the Egyptian pharaoh and his entire family with a great plague just for trying to hook up with Sarai. What a real cockblock. Anyway, it is estimated that during some pandemics in the past, like the Black Death of the 14th century, upwards of 1/3 of the world's population died from widespread plagues. While it's widely known that pandemics have killed off entire people groups, destabilized societies, transformed different cultures, and have even resulted in the wholesale upheaval of government systems and philosophies, what is not widely known is just how influential pandemics have been in the history of religion. Disease and pestilence have actually shaped the trajectory of things like major doctrines and even which religion or religious sect has become the dominant belief system in a given region. And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode from the Global Center for Religious Research, the influence of pandemics on religion. The idea that a major epidemic would alter the course of religious history shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. In fact, the very idea is central to both Judaism and Christianity. The entire Exodus story, where millions of Israelite slaves are released from captivity in Egypt, is predicated on the occurrence of several plagues. Now, regardless of whether the Exodus story is based on actual fact or not is beside the point. What's important to note is how the story demonstrates both an awareness and a fear of communicable diseases. Indeed, the so-called angel of death in Jewish tradition was itself some form of plague, which, according to the story, caused so much destruction that Pharaoh had no choice but to let the Israelites go. Well, sort of. As R.S. Bray reminds us, dispensing pestilence was a dominant characteristic of Yahweh in the Bible. He writes, "The next great source book is the Bible with its vengeful leading character Jehovah. There is no shortage of blains, fevers, eruptions, plagues, emerods, burning agues, consumption, pestilence, and inflammation, which were to be visited by an angry tribal god upon his disobedient subjects, or, in better times, their enemies." According to biblical texts, what became known as Judaism, which then eventually morphed into Christianity and Islam today, survived as a dominant Mediterranean religion because plagues wiped out all other people groups, along with their religious beliefs. Well, today we're going to briefly talk about the biggest example of pestilence changing the very course of religious history, the world's first recorded plague pandemic, Justinian's Plague, from the 6th and 7th centuries. Now, this plague was named after the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian the Great, and it is thought by some to be the most destructive pandemic ever recorded. Note how the ancient writer Procopius described the situation. "During these times there was a pestilence by which the whole human race came near to being annihilated. It embraced the whole of the world and blighted the lives of men." We should first recognize that what is labeled the Justinian Plague was actually a series of major plague outbreaks that occurred over a roughly 200-year time period. In reality, however, only the first wave of the pandemic, the first 2 or 3 years starting around 541 CE would be properly called the Justinian Plague by epidemiologists today. Now, from the description of ancient writers, as well as independent DNA testing of human skeletal remains from the era, we know that Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East was likely struck by a type of bubonic or a type of pneumonic plague, or maybe both. The exact nature of the plague is hard to pin down considering its high epidemic velocity and evidence that the disease was transmitted from person to person, which is uncharacteristic of things like the bubonic plague. In any case, the end result is that the Justinian plague killed an estimated 100 million people in the process. In the first wave of the attack, upwards of 25% of the Euro-Mediterranean population was destroyed. In subsequent waves, the plague reduced the population up to half its original size. Indeed, Procopius said that once the plague reached Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, it killed upwards of 10,000 people a day in the city, reaching a 56% mortality rate. Overall, only 1 in 3 people survived the disease. The effects of the pandemic in the region should not be underestimated. It practically led to the fall of the old Roman Empire. It kick-started the European Middle Ages, and it aided in the rise of Muslim Arab conquest, which would later contribute to the rapid spread of Islam in North Africa and the Middle East, all because the plague had crippled the Byzantine Empire beyond recovery. Interestingly, just when Emperor Justinian was about to reunite the western and eastern halves of the Roman Empire against Germanic invaders, the plague erupted and caused the fragmentation of Europe into competing kingdoms. This fragmented system of government remained in place and led to things like the feudal system and serfdom. This then provided an opportunity for Muslims to invade parts of Europe, resulting in the Catholic Crusades and innumerable other religious conflicts. In fact, the success of Islam during the Byzantine Arab Wars may have been due to the fact that Eastern Europe was still recovering from a severe shortage of food, manpower, and money, whereas the Arabs were largely unaffected by the pandemic. The Muslim conquests of the Middle East in places like Syria, Iraq, and Iran would eventually result in major denominational, territorial, and political splits within Islam itself. In fact, the Justinian Plague was partly responsible for bringing the Persian people into the Muslim fold, which would later result in Persians joining the ruling echelons of Islam. To this day, the Persian influence on Islam has been in many ways more dominant than the original Arab culture. Iranian Islam was a second advent of Islam itself, and it was this Persian influence that led to the wholesale conversion of Turkey and parts of India, which of course resulted in the Ottoman Turkish Empire centuries later. Even Islamic architecture borrows heavily from the old Persian culture and religion. By weakening Eastern Europe and the Middle East, the Justinian Plague made it possible for Persians to convert to Islam in the first place. Naturally, political and ethnic grievances took hold between Arabs and Persians, and to this day, Shia Muslims make up the majority of places like Iraq and Iran. Persian Muslims are largely Shiite, while Arab Muslims are largely Sunni, resulting in innumerable religious conflicts and proxy wars between Iran and Saudi Arabia today. Of course, Islam was not the only benefactor of the Justinian Plague. The center of Christian power shifted away from Greek Orthodoxy in the East to Roman Catholicism in Northern and Western Europe, which of course would eventually result in the Protestant Reformation and the myriad of Christian denominations that would ensue as a result, including current American evangelicalism. But once the Justinian Plague wiped out the authority, prestige, and stability of Eastern Christianity, and also halted any chance of the West and East reuniting under one empire, Western Europe had to look to its own source of authority for social control. This meant that the Roman Catholic Church, under the sole leadership of their Pope, viewed itself as the spiritual ruling body in the West. Naturally, this continued division within the old Roman Empire simply inflamed political tension between Western and Eastern Christianity, eventually climaxing with the Great Schism between Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox in 1054. Because of the plague's devastating effects, Western Christianity, which most English speakers today derive their political, theological, and philosophical views from, entered what has been labeled the Dark Ages, where both the arts and public education suffered a major cultural and intellectual deterioration. And of course, as they say, the rest is history. All of this happened because the Justinian Plague interrupted or changed so much of the cultural and governmental infrastructure of the 6th century that Europe was thrust into the Middle Ages. Well, there you have it, researchers. This is just one example of how a global pandemic can shape the trajectory of religious and world history. Thanks for watching, and leave us a comment below about how you think some of our more recent pandemics can or will change the practice of religion today. And as always, we want to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters. If you want to support actual scientific research on religion around the world, you can find our Patreon link in the description below. Your support goes toward funding research experiments where scientists collaborate on groundbreaking research that has real-world transformational impact on our understanding of religious beliefs. And be sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you can get the latest updates on the different publications, academic conferences, and services provided by the Global Center for Religious Research. Take care, everyone.